Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Our guest today is Dr. Stacey Patton, author of Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. Dr. Patton posits that Black parents have a particular attachment to beating their kids, believing it will protect their children from street violence, the police, and prison. Dr. Patton says the practice reinforces racist ideology that Black kids are less civilized and need to be physically controlled. And she says we've got it all wrong when it comes to spare the rod, spoil the child. We'll talk about corporal punishment in the Black community from a completely different perspective. It's coming up next on Another View, so stay tuned.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Before we get to our topic today, which is a very interesting one, and I know that people already have a lot of opinions about to spank or not to spank, but I do want to tell you that we are beginning our new season for our Race Let's Talk About It town halls. We're very excited. The first one will be Saturday, October the 28th. It is at the Fort Monroe Theater on the peninsula in Hampton. And it is a film called James Baldwin, The Price of a Ticket. So we're going to watch the film, and then we will have a talk back with filmmakers Karen Thornton and Douglas Dempsey. The event is absolutely free, open to everyone. So please register at whro.org/talkaboutrace. And it is brought to you by the Sankofa Projects, Fort Monroe Authority, National Park Service, and Hampton Roads Pride. So we appreciate all of our supporters from the community, and we hope that you will come out and join us. That is Saturday, October the 28th, James Baldwin, The Price of a Ticket at the Fort Monroe Theater. For more information, whro.org/talkaboutrace. And I also want to invite you to Champions for Children Prevent Child Abuse. Their awards breakfast is going to be held on October the 11th at 7:30 in the morning. I have the honor of serving as the MC for this event. It will be at the Main at Norfolk. And the keynote speaker is Delegate Christopher Stolley. And if you want more information, you can call 757-440-2749. That's 757-440-2749. And the whole idea of prevent child abuse dovetails very nicely into our topic for today. The book is called Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America, written by our guest today, Dr. Stacey Patton. In her book, Dr. Patton implores Black parents to think before they strike. And she uses history, sociology, popular culture, science, psychology, and personal stories to show how corporal punishment is a crucial factor in explaining why Black folks are subject to higher rates of school suspensions, expulsions, criminal prosecutions, child abuse cases, and foster care placements that can actually funnel into the prison system. Dr. Patton, that's a really heavy thing, and welcome to Another View. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the show.
Oh, I really appreciate you being with us. So as we get started into this discussion, I want to talk about some definitions first, because I think people have a perception that there is a big difference between whooping, which is the term you use throughout the book, and a pop on the behind. So when you look at words like spank, pop, whoop, beat, are they all the same to you?
Yes. It's just semantics. All of them involve hitting and pain, and each of them is a form of violence. And all of them, no matter what you call it, or try to parse out the severity of the pain or violence, place children at risk for the same negative karma. We have 50 years worth of science that show that just spanking, two strikes on the backside of a child, can harm brain development, can sow the seeds for low IQ, aggressive behavior, depression, drug abuse, deviance, and chronic health problems over the lifespan, things like obesity, diabetes, cancer, and so on. And it can also trigger early puberty in girls. If you start striking your child or popping, as we like to say, a child when they're 2, 3 years old, a girl child that is, you can actually begin triggering the process for early puberty.
And so there's scientific research behind all of that. But, in the Black community, this is a pretty sensitive topic because most people, Black parents, or a lot of Black parents, think that this is just a form of loving discipline. So what's the difference? Why is it so ingrained in our community?
Because it's a form of internalized racism. It's something that was taught to us on the plantation. We believe that, slave mothers believed that if they hit their child, it was better than a plantation owner or a overseer beating a child because it would be worse. We have this myth in our community that beating a child will save them from the prison system, and that's not working well at all for Black America, because if it did, we wouldn't be having national conversations about mass incarceration. We have a warped sense of what love is, that, pain, hitting, and violence don't belong in the same sentence with love. So it's really a form of internalized racism. Our preachers say it's the right thing, that it's God. God wants us to whoop kids, even though Jesus would never whoop a child. It's ingrained in our folklore. It's ingrained in our comedy, in our music, our rap songs, and so on.
Well, I'm not trying to be flip at all, but I'm pushing back a little bit on this in the sense that, a lot of Black parents I've heard say, if you're at the grocery store and you see a young child who is not African American and they're laid out on the floor, screaming and hollering and so forth, that the whole timeout thing is not effective, and that the reason that they're laid out in the middle of the floor is because they haven't been whooped. Do you agree with that? Well, obviously you disagree with that, but why?
I disagree with it because when children, and again, I'm coming from a scientific perspective,
Sure.
when a child throws a tantrum, a lot of people look at that behavior as willful, as this child is trying to manipulate the parent or gain control over the parent, when the science tells us that there's actually a biophysiological reaction going on in the child's body. A lot of parents don't understand brain development and the basics of child development and neurological development, the development of speech, emotional regulation. A child's brain does not finish growing until they're developing until they're 24 years old. So they don't have, the cognitive skills and the regulatory skills, to moderate their behavior. And so when you hit a child, what you're doing is wiring that child's brain to think about fear, to avoid pain. But then you're at the same time shortcutting other developmental processes like critical thinking skills and modeling behavior and language development skills. And so then we wonder why when our kids become teenagers, they're out in the streets, beefing with each other and solving conflicts through violence, or they go to school and they're not listening to a teacher who can't put their hands on them. They're wondering why there's all these behavioral problems. Well, their parents were their first teachers of violence when they were 2, 3 years old and having a temper tantrum, and they hit the child because they don't want to feel embarrassed. They're parenting from a place of ego, and they don't understand brain development.
So what
you do before you go in the grocery store, you set you set the rules. You come face down with the child at eye length and you say, "Look, we're going into this store. There will be no begging. There will be no running around and falling out and temper tantrums. Here's a snack so you can eat that while you're in the cart, or you can help mommy or daddy, calculate prices or find oranges. Make the child part of the shopping experience."
And that way to keep them from misbehaving. And if they start to misbehave, then what should you do?
You take them back outside and you have a talk. And
have a
you
talk.
Say, listen,
okay.
Yes, you have a talk, and this is not appropriate behavior. And so, we're going to stay out here until we get back on the same page, and you go back in. And you have to do this. You have to model this behavior over and over again. And the problem is a lot of people don't want to put in the work, or they're saying, I need to get in here and do my grocery store shopping and get out. I don't have time for this. And, I'm just going to smack the child because that's the easiest thing to do right then and there. And the child will comply when you coerce them, when you threaten them, when you do harm to their body. And so it's still not teaching them for the long term, the skills that they need to develop to navigate public space. And you begin laying the seeds for these other physiological and social outcomes and psychological outcomes later on in life.
So, Stacey, then what do you say to people who say, because I can hear them all over the airways right now going, well, I got beat and I turned out just fine. What's your response to that?
That statement right there in and of itself is a sign of brain damage. And I'm not saying that to be disrespectful to people. But again, I come from this from a scientific perspective. So what happens is when you hit a child, right, if even just threatening and yelling at a child, the brain, it triggers neurochemical reactions, things like oxytocin and cortisol. The body has to adjust to fear, right? And if you keep subjecting a child to that over time, it messes with the prefrontal cortex of the brain. This is the area of the brain that you need for, once again, emotional regulation, cognition, IQ, and memory. So people who grow up and they've been hit and they say, I've turned out fine, and that this was good for me, what they've done is learn to invert violence as something that was good. And so a lot of times people seriously cannot remember the fear, the betrayal, the negative feelings that they felt as a child who was under threat, a child who was being assaulted. So they grow up and they think this was something good. And that's a sign of brain damage. So they rationalize it. Or you hear Black people especially say, well, I'm not in jail today. I'm not on drugs. I'm a good person. I have a job. And I say, oh, you agree with NASA, meaning that long-standing racist narrative that says the only way to make Black people into law-abiding, civilized human beings is to process the Black body through pain. And so we believe that. And it's a sign of internalized racism that we need to be, physically coerced and threatened and beaten in order to be good people.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking about corporal punishment in the African American community. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So you go back into history in terms of back to Africa and back to African culture, and spanking and corporal punishment then was not a part of the culture. Is that correct? Did we not learn this
correct.
until we came to the United States?
Until we came here. There's lots of research, anthropological research, historical research, and so on hunter-gatherer societies in West Africa, Latin America, even with the indigenous people here in North America. Coercing kids, hitting children was not part of our culture. So I hear Black people all the time say, oh, we brought this over from Africa. So these are the same people who will be like, they stole our religion, they stole our languages, they stole all this stuff, but whipping children survived the Middle Passage. So then I have to set the record straight to say, first of all, West African people did not believe that children were born in sin. That's a bastardized European interpretation of Christianity. Our West African ancestors were not Christians. They were not reading Bibles. That whole concept of spare the rod, spoil the child, all of that was introduced to us beginning in the 16th century when Europeans were taking Black bodies from Africa and dispersing them throughout the diaspora to support this labor system. Okay, so that's number one. We believe children were reincarnated ancestors. So the Nigerians would name their kids things like Babatunde, father has returned. Yedatunde, mother has returned. The Bang people would never put a child on a floor because children were considered gods. You didn't hit a child because that diminished you as the adult. And so, if you believe your kids are gods, that they're mystical, that they're magical, that they're powerful, you don't coerce them, right? And so it is the process of enslavement, the Middle Passage experience, treating people as property, right? That changes the value and view of our children. Colonialism, Christianizing, all of those things that introduce, new types of sinful behavior for kids. The other thing I have to tell people is that the majority of captives who were brought from West Africa to the U.S. And other parts of the diaspora were children. They were teenagers, some as young as 9 years old up until about 15, 16 years old. So these were people who had not completed childhood themselves and had not yet parented, right? So you have this enterprise that is built off of the degradation, the breaking and coercing of young people who then for the next few generations end up teaching that kind of behavior to their children.
So when they came to America, when they started to learn Christianity, the whole idea of spare the rod, spoil the child, you say we misinterpret that, and that is not
Yes.
what was meant.
That's not
what do you mean by that?
Once again, we were not reading Bibles. We
Uh-huh.
were not quoting "spare the rod, spoil the child" when we were in West Africa. Most of us were either Muslims or worshiping Orishas or whatever. The first 100 years that we were in this country, our enslaved African ancestors did not practice Christianity because there was no incentive to convert them to Christianity. Slave masters had no incentive of doing this because they didn't want them to be baptized, and also believe that they could receive redemption and all the good things, be entitled to all the good things that Christianity, has to offer folks. So it's not until the Second Great Awakening that we start worshiping, we become Christians in, large numbers. But if you look at spare the rod, spoil the child, first of all, it's not even in the Bible. That verse is not there. There's no verse that says spare the rod, spoil the child. That actually comes from a 17th century poem that's just gotten, mixed up, all these, years later. But if you look at the Hebrew interpretation of rod, it's a symbol, or it's actually, something that sheep used. Like it has a little crook at the top of it. And the only time a shepherd would use this with a sheep is if a sheep got caught in some rocks. And so you pull the sheep back in to safety. The only time it was wielded in any kind of violent way was to ward off wolves. Okay, nowhere in the Bible do you see a sheep picking up a rod to beat a shepherd picking up a rod to beat a sheep, because sheep were valuable. You didn't want to harm it. You didn't want to scar it up. You didn't want to drive it away by being violent. And there's so many uses of the rod in the Bible. Thy rod and staff comfort me. That doesn't sound like a whooping to me. And so people have misinterpreted this. And I'm always like, listen, if you want to make this literal interpretation of the rod, we might as well bring back sacrificing kids, drowning them. I mean, the Old Testament is horrendous when it comes to the treatment of children. But so then we have the New Testament. So Jesus says what? Children should be coddled, be kind. We should be more like them. We should emulate their behavior. People have this literal interpretation of the Bible, and a lot of that has undergirded this very toxic and abusive parenting of children.
Our phone lines are lit up, so let's take a couple of calls, and then I want to talk to you about Adrian Peterson and Toya Graham. But let's go to Jenny in Norfolk first. Hi, Jenny, you're on the air. Hello, Jenny.
Were you looking for Judy?
Oh, Judy. Hello, Judy.
Yes. Well, I used to tell my daughter if she misbehaved in the store or begged for things that I would sing. I would sing, no, 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 no. And so I only had to do it once, and then I would just look at her and say, do you want me to sing? And that worked for a couple of years until she started singing, yes, 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 yes.
So you found a comical way in order to keep your child in line without having to spank.
Right.
Okay.
I would just look at her and say, want me to sing?
Okay, Jenny, thanks so much for the call. Judy, I'm sorry. Thanks so much for the call. We appreciate that. Let's go to Bruce in Chesapeake. Hi, Bruce. You're on the air.
Well, thank you. I wonder if the speaker has any children of her own. Clearly, discipline has to be done in moderation. It shouldn't be done out of anger or when you're out of control. But I got disciplined occasionally. I don't think I'm mentally ill, but perhaps I'm not the right person to judge my mental status. For her to equate this on a racial issue, that it has to deal with the slave master, is just ridiculous.
Okay, Bruce, let's let her respond to you. Thanks so much for the call.
Okay,
Stacey?
so I'm going to try to remember. Yeah, I'm going to try to remember all three of his points here. First of all, discipline means to teach. So and so many people think that when they hear the word discipline, they already go to a physical place, that it requires physical coercion and violence, striking a child is an act of violence, period. We like to call it different names to make ourselves feel better about it. If you hit a dog, it's animal cruelty. If you hit an adult, it's assault. But in this culture, hitting a child is for their own good. Children are the only group of human beings where it is still legally okay to assault them. So discipline means to teach. You strike a child, what are you teaching them? You're teaching them that violence and coercion is the proper way to communicate and to get people to do what you want them to do. The second point about whether I have children or not. So I get this question all the time. I don't have children. And so people use that against me to say, oh, she has no right to talk about, physical discipline of kids. Well, I was a child once, and unlike a lot of people who have children, I haven't forgotten what it means to and feels like to actually be one. And so, I say to people, look, if I'm a doctor who wants to talk about treating, testicular cancer, must I have a pair of testicles and cancer to do it? If I want to talk about appropriately burying the dead, should I have died and come back to life to be able to do this? If people don't want me to talk about hitting children and the harms that it causes because I'm not a parent, then listen to the thousands of parents every year who have either killed their kids or physically abused them or sexually abused them, if being a parent is a prerequisite to have a seat at the table to talk about this. And as far as the slavery question, what we're talking about is intergenerational trauma. That this is a behavior that white people taught African Americans. They also taught it to Native Americans. You cannot separate this from the history of slavery, from lynching and segregation, the rise of the carceral state, the mass incarceration, the war on drugs. All of these things are forms of racial trauma and discrimination that deeply impact parenting. And African Americans are disproportionately incarcerated for child abuse, and their kids are disproportionately placed in foster care at much higher rates than white children.
And this was done. It was done to Black parents were taught throughout all of those examples that they would rather discipline their children harshly so that they would not do the things that would make the slave owner or the slave overseer or the police officer, et cetera, do that discipline themselves. Exactly.
And the thing is, yes, nearly, depending on which survey you look, 70 to 80% of Americans, regardless of race, hit their children, right? But when we disaggregate by race, Latinos and whites hover around 70%. And this is over surveys that have been taken for the past 40 years. And African Americans have steadily remained around 80%. But African Americans have a much higher fatality rate. African Americans kill an average of 360 children per year as a result of maltreatment. That's a rate that's 3 times higher than all other racial groups. Yeah. So we have a disparate impact that we need to talk about.
According to a CNN poll, 70% of people believe corporal punishment is okay, and 85% of African Americans support it. Let's talk to Chad in Yorktown. Hi, Chad. You're on the air.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. Was not familiar with the author. Just happened to be listening to the radio, and my question was, and she answered part of it, was, do you see that applicable across all races? I'm a white male and was spanked when I was a child, maybe similar to the previous caller, but was just curious on you have other ethnic groups that maybe first or second generation Americans. Does the author find that applicable across all races?
Okay, thanks for the call, Chad. Stacey?
Yes, once again, America is a violent country and is a country that believes in doing violence to children. The majority of children, irrespective of race, are growing up in households where they're being hit by adults. So it spans across region, geography, class, religion. A lot of the surveys show that in the South, especially particularly the Bible Belt, these attitudes are even more deeply entrenched among both blacks and whites. My concern is focusing this conversation on African Americans because of the disproportionality, because of the consequences for the school to prison pipeline and the adult prison pipeline, and because of the violence in many of our cities like Baltimore and Chicago, and so on.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about rethinking using corporal punishment in the Black community with Dr. Stacey Patton, author of Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. I want to talk to you real quickly about Adrian Peterson and Toya Graham. Adrian Peterson, the football player who was charged with child abuse and beating his son, and then the Baltimore supermom, as she was known, Toya Graham. And the picture is very vivid in my brain. I'm from Baltimore, but of this mother who was trying to get her child away from the protests that were going on in Baltimore after the killing of Freddie Gray. And you say that they were both wrong in the way that they handled what they did.
Yes. So here's a little boy who I think he was about 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old. I'm not sure what his age was at the time. He hits his brother. He pushes his brother off of a toy. So his father wants to teach him to not be violent towards his brother by taking a switch and whipping him naked with the switch to the point where he lacerates his testicles and leaves marks on him. Clearly, it's child abuse, but many people did not see it that way. Charles Barkley, a lot of the
sports announcers and so forth.
They said they did not see that leaving lacerations on a child's testicles was a form of abuse, and this speaks to a general attitude among African Americans that you talk to people and they say, yes, I got whooped with extension cords, switches, belts. I had marks and, things like that. But that wasn't abuse. My mama loved me. And so then they find themselves, standing before judges or, being arrested, confronted by child, protection services. And there's this cultural rift between the two. We don't have a universal working definition of what constitutes a spanking, a whooping, or abuse.
And I think, Stacey, that's part of the issue is that people really do make a differentiation between if you spank a child, if you pop them on the butt, if you whoop them, if you beat them. In people's minds that they differentiate that they don't think it's the same.
Well, they don't think it's the same, but once again, even spanking without, I got beat with switches, extension cords, all of those things. But even when she wasn't using, an object, it still hurt.
It still hurt.
I still wanted it to stop. And once again, I go back to the science. When you hit your child, let's say you smack them twice on the backside, right? Clothes on and everything. What a parent does not see, they'll hear the crying, they'll see the tears, and then they stop. But what a parent does not see are the neurochemical reactions that those two hits have triggered in that child's body. And that neurochemical process that can continue to impact the child's brain, their gut, their heart, their stomach, and other areas of the body for hours after the tears have dried, the pain has stopped. They don't see any scars, but what they don't see is what they're doing internally to their child over time. There was just a new study that came out that said children who experience violence in the house, whether it's parental violence or violence against them, have a higher risk of developing obesity. So they looked at cortisol. That's that thing you need, that chemical you need for fight or flight response, right? When you're afraid, when you're under attack, you want to run, whatever, parent hits the child, right? And they're sparking off cortisol. Cortisol then ends up shutting down metabolism later on. So then the kids are eating to comfort themselves because the body is responding to trauma. And later on, they end up being big people. And later on, these are the same people who are obese, morbidly obese, saying, oh, I'm fine. My mama whooped me and I'm fine. But look at you. So there were these things, the accumulation of pain and fear and trauma and biochemical responses that you were subjected to in your environment as a child that has produced what you are today.
So with the Toya Graham incident, people all over the country were saying, yay, go mom. She snatched him out. She was beating him, while she was pulling him away. And again, your response to that?
So I took a lot of heat because I wrote a piece in the Washington Post
I heard.
that said, why are we celebrating the beating of a black child? And this was black and white people were coming at me. And I said, how interesting that both black and white people's philosophies align and agree around beating and coercing black children. So you had all these people, the mayor, police chief, the president, all these folks saying, stop the violence, stop the violence. But then she comes out cussing and wailing on her child, but not this violence. And it's like black people who say, we don't want the police to be violent with our kids. We don't want, gangs to be violent with our kids or teachers or other people. But my kind of violence is the good kind, right? Like we don't see that police violence, the violence in the streets, and the violence that black children are experiencing at home are all strange and bitter fruit from the exact same tree. So basically the message is it's not generational structural racism and devaluation that's the problem. It's not police brutality that's the problem. It's not the divestment in schools. It's not poverty. It's not all of these things that are the issues. We're going to lay all of these problems at the feet of the so-called undisciplined black child. That our neighborhoods look the way they do today because black children aren't being whooped or beaten enough is absolutely absurd.
Okay, let's talk to Zoe from Northern Virginia. Hi, Zoe. You're on the air.
Yes, Barbara Ham, I just got a question. I've been on hold waiting to say what I have to say. Now, one, when you talk about not whipping the children and then you talk about beating the children, I myself am for giving a whooping because I see the difference between parents who raise their children and go, let me give you some time out. Let me not give you a whooping when you're being bad. And then I've seen how they turn around and they end up beating the parents. So what do you do about that? I mean, you turn around and you're going 10 years old and 8-year-old children out there beating on their own parents in a store, telling their parents what to do and things like that. Now, I'm not for beating a child, but I'm going to tell you, when it comes to a situation, I will whoop that child. And I have told when my daughter had went to school, she was young, she was on the monkey bars, fell off the monkey bars, and one of the teachers got mad at me because I had said something to her, and she turned me into CPS. Oh, I let them come to my home. Oh, and I told them, I will not beat my children, but I will whoop them if they do harm to others. Because I think that is very important. And whether you talk about going back to what they didn't do in Africa and all that, to me, I don't know what they did in Africa because I wasn't way back then. We never know what they really did unless we have an ancestor who's still living who can really tell us the true facts of what really happened in Africa.
Okay, Zoe. Okay, Zoe, we got your point. Let's let our guests respond to you. Thanks so much for the call. I appreciate it.
Oh, my goodness. This is such a dishonest and hyperbolic reaction. I always hear this. The kids are whooping their parents. The kids are killing their parents. Well, I always say, let's go to the data. What does the data tell us? Do we have any data, police data, that shows that 10-year-old children, as she say, are assaulting their parents? Do we have that data? Do we have any data that shows that kids are actually killing their kids? It's actually called parricide, right? That how many kids are actually killing their children? Number one, it's actually white males who are the ones who are disproportionately the folks who kill their parents. And they're generally adults by the time they actually kill their kids. So there's no widespread phenomenon of children going around assaulting their parents or actually killing them. So people fall into this dishonest, hyperbolic, anecdotal, extremist view of children's behavior. If I don't beat this kid, then they're going to knock me down someday. They're going to kill me. And it's not happening. Children are more, and particularly black children, are more at risk for being assaulted, seriously injured, or killed by their own parents than anybody else, including the police. Right? So you get all this, crazy talk, okay? And then these people who's like, I won't beat my child, but I'll whoop them. And I'm like, okay, so what's the difference? Do you hold the belt differently? Do you measure the distance between your swing before you do that? How do you prepare that? People say, well, I don't whoop my child when I'm angry. I sit down and talk to them first. Well, the premeditation is quite creepy to me. So if you're talking, and if your talking is effective, if you have the emotional literacy skills and to talk about these issues and to guide your child through the behaviors you want, why do you need to hit them afterwards? There are just people who go through all these extremes to justify being violent with a kid, and it's just disturbing.
It sounds like a defensive statement.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In other words, I'm listening to the calls, and I get it. I mean, I will be honest. I'm a parent, and yes, I have spanked my child. But if you listen, and if we are to be an evolved people and we're to learn new things, I just hope that people will be open-minded enough to at least consider that maybe there's a different way to raise our children. And so it's very interesting to me to listen to people talk about so much about how, important it is to whip their children. Kara calls us from Newport News. Hi, Kara. You're on the air. Or is it Kyra?
Hi. First I wanted to say that I think the dialogue and the perspective here is amazing. And as a mother of a young child, it's really kind of reminding me of some things that I've already promised myself to adhere to. But I was actually wondering if the doctor had if she dived into any of the issues surrounding the acceptance of I feel like these children are normalized. They're being normalized to the acceptance of hands being placed on them, and especially from a female child's perspective. In what ways is that would that teach a child that if they don't want to be touched physically, sexually, domestic abuse, things like that, in what way is that sending a message to that child that you should just put up with it? And have you dived into any of those issues and whether or not there's a higher prevalence of that with those types of children?
Okay, let's let her answer. Thanks so much for the call. We appreciate it.
That's
Dr.
a
Patton?
great question. Great question. So for my book, and a lot of this had to get cut out because I was literally like 5,000 words over my limit. So I interviewed Black women who, and I've written about this in other articles, I interviewed Black women who were both corporally punished as girls and experienced sexual abuse because I wanted to see if there was any connection. Mm-hmm. And so in the psychological literature, it shows that girls, particularly, when you hit them, there's a surge of oxytocin, which, can help trigger early puberty, early bodily development, and so on and so forth. It sends the message to hurry up and mature and procreate because you might not survive this hostile environment to do it later. So you have these girls who are sexual early on, and the parents beat them in response to that, even though they were the ones who triggered it early on in their childhood. But these women that I interviewed, so for example, when you hit a child, it says to the child, "My body is not my own. You can do what you want with it." And it puts a child at risk of being primed for sexual abuse by other folks. So if you have a parent who says, "I'm hitting you because I love you," but then you got Uncle so-and-so who lives on the third floor and is inappropriately touching the child and say, "I'm doing it because I love you," a child whose brain isn't fully developed doesn't necessarily know how to discern the differences between the two touches. I interviewed one woman. I asked her, I said, "Why didn't you disclose to your mother that you were being sexually abused?" And she says, "Well, because at least it wasn't a whupping."
Wow.
I was talking with the director of the New Orleans Child Advocacy Center some months ago when I was visiting Tulane Medical School, and she was seeing amped up numbers of cases of young girls who were not disclosing sexual abuse to their mothers because they were afraid that if they came to their mothers and said, "Daddy or stepfather or brother or uncle or whomever is touching me inappropriately," that the mother would respond by being abusive to the child. So there's definitely, a relationship there. I interviewed one young woman who her mother caught her masturbating, and so the mother whooped her. And so then when somebody else, a male family member, was inappropriately touching, she didn't say anything because she thought, "Oh, I'm going to get whooped because I can't touch myself." Yeah, exactly. So there's definitely you prime your child, whether it's a girl child for sexual abuse, domestic violence later on in life, right? you're priming boys to be abusive, particularly when it's a mother beating a son. I have a whole chapter on that, on Black men who talked about being beaten by their mothers. And then later on, it impacted their attitudes and treatment towards girls sexually and physically. So we must look at the ways in which childhood is foundational for these later dysfunctional behaviors.
Okay, our phone lines are lit up, so we're going to try to go through because we only have about 8 minutes left in the show. Timothy joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Timothy. You're on the air.
My call. I had a comment that was said, I guess, earlier now in the show from your speaker. She said that the spare the rod, spoil the child, of course, not being in the Bible. I only have the King James Version, but the one I found was from Proverbs 13:24. He that spareth the rod hateth his son, he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes.
Right. She was talking about those specific words: spare the rod, spoil the child.
About spoiling the child. Well, yeah,
that's not what.
Say spoil the child. I might say it's more hateth his son. So, I mean, I guess it was being paraphrased in a way for people to, over time, for people to understand it better when they were looking at it. And so, I guess a couple of things have come up since then during the conversation that I guess I wanted to talk about.
Okay, very quickly, Timothy, get one of your points because we want to try to get to everybody on the air.
Okay.
Okay.
As far as the levels at which somebody can either, as she said, one of the ladies said, whooping versus beating. I do think that there is a difference between either chastising or punishing your child versus absolutely beating your child and causing physical and other kinds of harm, and that causing some kind of response, or in some case, like a little bit of, I guess, pain, keeping my child from running out into the street where he could kill him, and versus, actually talking to my child and telling him, okay, well, yeah, you can't take that pen from your sister, is different. I'm not going to spank my child for taking a toy from another kid, but if he's running on the street, I might slap his hand so he doesn't get a bigger pain by being killed.
Okay, let's let her respond. We appreciate your call, Timothy. Thank you. Dr. Patton?
So once again, people engage in the semantics and wordplay and justification. So I say to adults, listen, would you want somebody who's bigger than you, more powerful than you, has more authority than you, to smack you, when you do something wrong? Don't do something to a child that you wouldn't want somebody more powerful and having more authority to do to you, period. It's an act of violence. Teaching, disciplining means to teach, it means to model. Use your language, use creativity. I'm not going to get into this. There's a difference between beating and spanking, and I just don't. I just don't do it.
Let's talk to Saida in Yorktown. Hi, Saida, you're on the air.
Hi, good afternoon. I was just calling because I just wanted to say thank you for doing this show today. I usually always miss your show, and I was able to catch it today.
Thank you.
My husband and I have been struggling with, we were both beat as kids. We have 3 young Black children that we're raising, 2 boys, and just trying to figure out how to deal with whether we're spanking, whether we're talking, and we get into modes sometimes where we are able to talk it out, and then sometimes we spank. And it's just this knowing that there is a difference and struggling with how to do it. So thank you. And can I get the name of the book again?
Yeah, the name of the book is called Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. And Dr. Patton, why don't you tell Saida about your organization, Spare the Kids?
Yes, so you can visit www.sparethekids.com, and we have weekly parenting tips for folks to learn how to handle these everyday things like running out in the street or touching a hot stove without actually striking your child. There are parent videos. There are parents who take a pledge not to hit their kids. And I also want to say that a lot of times when a child acts up and does something wrong, if you grew up in a house where you could be yelled at, pop, spank, beat, or whatever for doing normal childhood development things, when you have your own kids, sometimes when a kid is doing that, you're actually being triggered back to your own childhood experience. And so then you repeat those cycles, like, a kid who might cry or throw a tantrum. So you're actually responding back to your own childhood and how your parent reacted to you. And then that can impact the way you see and respond to your own children's behavior. So parents have to do a lot of work in reconciling with their own parents' childhood. And this is why you see a lot of defensiveness in this conversation, because people think, oh, she's talking about my mama. that you can say your mama was wrong to hit you or your father was wrong to hit you and still honor them and change your behavior.
Right. And I it really is something to think about because, as you said, I wasn't aware of all of the other things that could happen to children in terms of what happens to them when they experience violence. I think that's the biggest issue. I think we have about 2 minutes left. Let's try one more call. Daniel joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Daniel. You're in the air.
Hi, how are you?
Okay. Very quickly, what's your question?
Let me very quick. Okay, so I'm trying to see the first. I guess once she was talking to the person, she was saying that the brain developed from the age of 24. So I'm trying to ask, like, if somebody is in the military, during at the age of 18, and the military go through the training of the boot camp where they receive yelling and some hardship kind of training, is there like
a correlation there? Okay, let me see.
Yeah, there's a correlation over there.
Okay, thanks so much for the call, Daniel. I appreciate that. I don't know, Dr. Patton. I guess he's saying since they're still not, I guess he's talking about since they're still children, if their brain is still developing, does that type of yelling also affect them the way that spanking would?
I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't seen any studies, but we know that, for example, between the ages of 0 and 3 are the most crucial times in terms of the development of a child's brain.
Okay.
And so what they're eating, what they're listening to, what they're being exposed to over that period especially is foundational. And if you keep dealing with this, dysfunctional habits and behaviors, you can alter a child's brain, but you can also correct it. Our brains are wonderful things. We can reverse this type of stuff through therapy and healthy habits.
Okay. So the bottom line is you're not saying don't discipline your children. You're asking parents to stop spanking their children. Is that correct?
Yes. Stop assaulting their bodies, no matter what you call it.
All right. The book is called Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America by Dr. Stacey Patton. Thank you so very much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. And we'll be right back.
I'm with Marcellus, and you all are checking out Another View. Don't go anywhere. Check us out.
And welcome back. It's the reason why we call the show Another View, because we give you another perspective on issues that face our community. He's just 26 years old and has already produced 2 CDs and is currently working on his first film. Saxophonist Michael Jamil is well on his way to fulfilling his dreams, but this talented young artist took a brief intermission from his musical journey to share his story with our Lisa Godley.
Picked it up in the 6th grade when they tell everybody to pick an instrument for middle school. My uncle played the sax, so that's why I picked the saxophone. And it was smooth. I didn't have like a choice of any other instrument. When they asked me, it was like, what do you want to play? I was like, the saxophone. Then after I started playing, I kind of fell in love with it. After that, it was a wrap.
He also played the sax for his church, but surprisingly did not choose music as his major in college. At least, not at first. Instead, he chose business as a major at Virginia Wesleyan.
The basketball team there, I could just see the passion. I could see the drive. Like what they were doing was like what they wanted to do. And I played an instrument, but they had no music program at Virginia Wesleyan. So I was like, man, I want to study music. I want to do something with this horn. I was trying to find a college, and I found Norfolk State because they had a good band. I really didn't want to major in music. I just wanted to be in a jazz band and do something with my horn. But then when I got over there, the music program actually gave me more credits than the business program did. So it was lined up like it was supposed to be.
As a member of the Spartan Legion, Michael says he learned discipline, which came in handy when he decided to produce his first CD, Sax Appeal. It was about relationships, but he wanted his second CD to go a little deeper and speak to the current social climate. He named it Black Magic.
I was looking at the world and I was like, how can I incorporate what's going on right now into it? And one of my friends who was in the studio said something like Black Magic, and it caught my ear. There's something magical about our race. The fact that we can be resilient through slavery. Everything that happened to us kind of made us better in a way.
The different tracks carry names like tension, repentance, and perspectives. And then there's a track that seems a little out of place, desire. Has there ever been a time when you said, I'm done with this, I'm so over the saxophone, I don't know what to do?
Never. It never ever crossed my mind. It's like breathing.
In addition to Streetcar, Michael picked up the sax once more for VSC's production of The Wiz. He then expanded his acting chops when he was cast as Jimmy Early in NSU's production of Dreamgirls. This came as a great experience for his screenplay, which looks at a group of friends who find themselves getting in over their heads on senior skip day.
My dad listened to the album. I always let him listen to tracks, and he was like, man, you got a movie there. And that was the third time I heard it. I was like, okay, God speaking. So then I started writing. I came up with the concept, and from there, man, everything just started growing. I got people in my corner that was helping me, and so it's pretty much almost done now.
Michael is hoping to premiere his film at a theater in Norfolk in November. In the meantime, his Black Magic CD can be found on several sites, including iTunes, Apple Music, and Amazon. In fact, things are turning so fast that he recently quit his full-time job to focus on his dream.
I saved up some money, and I read Steve Harvey's book, Jump, and so I'm in the middle of my jump. Okay. And I'm on Faith Street. You know, I have the belief it's going to happen, and things has just been back to back to back to back to back. So from the youth, I would say just start off with faith in whatever you want to do in life, because that mental battle is what keeps us from getting to that next level. It's not hard, but we make it hard. People think, oh, there's a million saxophone players out there. What's going to make you different? But you got to believe that, you know, I was called for this purpose. It's something bigger than just me.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
Wow, and Michael did an internship with WHRO Public Media during the summer of 2013, and we wish him all the very best. So there was a lot to ponder about the information shared on today's show. If you'd like to hear it again or share it with a friend, please visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. And while you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows, and we're on Facebook, so you can like us. And I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week, the practice of passing in the Black community, based on the novel Provenance by Donna Drew Sawyer. It's an Another View history lesson. And speaking of history lessons, we want to invite you again to attend our next Race Let's Talk About It Town Hall. It's James Baldwin, The Price of a Ticket, Saturday, October 28th, 2017 at 2 p.m. at the Fort Monroe Theater on Tidball Road in Fort Monroe, Virginia. That's over in Hampton. And we will be viewing the film and then doing a talk back with filmmakers Karen Thorenson and Douglas Dempsey. It is free. It is open to everyone. And we hope that you will register at whro.org/talkaboutrace. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Kamaria Mason answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thank you so very, very much for listening to Another View.